Welcome back to another session. I hope you all well. In today's session, I'd like to talk about depression, but specifically, I'd like to ask a question. What is the relationship between depression and your adrenal or your thyroid functions? In other words, is your depression linked to adrenal and thyroid hyperfunction? Is it possible? Now, in the session I covered previously, I made reference to that possible link. It's not just a possible, it's also probable, and it's plausible. And in today's session, therefore, I'd like to move just a little bit further with regards to how your adrenal or your thyroid glands play a role and play a part in how you feel, from a sense of, are you fatigued, are you depressed, are you anxious, are you not functioning in a manner that you know that you have either historically the ability or that you feel within yourself that you can. So is your depression linked to your adrenal and your thyroid hyperfunction? And possibly is this the cause of your fatigue, your depression? Now, the answer to that question, long-winded as it may have been, is I don't know. I do not know. But I think it's worth exploring. At several parts of this series, you've heard me talk about the whole issue about the engineering diagnosis process and how your body functions like a car. And whenever you take your car to a mechanic, what the mechanic never tells you is that whatever diagnosis he believes to be the case, or he's put forward to you as a possible cause or case, is simply a hypothesis. He doesn't know. He may be experienced. He might have a high index of suspicion, which I recommend that you do, especially with regards to your body, but he does not know. The only way he finds out if his intuitions and speculations and diagnoses are correct is when he applies a treatment regime to solve the problem, and then retrospectively looking back to see whether his treatment regimes did in fact solve the problem. If the outcome is positive, then he knows that his diagnosis was correct. If it was wrong, then he or she knows that his diagnosis was incorrect. In a similar manner, when we talk about depression, what we have to do is apply the same engineering pathway. It's also a clinical pathway. There's the same methodology used by medical doctors. Generally comes from science. You do not know until you know. Now, this is not a play on words. You do not know until you know. That simply means that it's from the process of trying things out that we actually eliminate things that do not work. If you're suffering from depression, one of the questions I put forward was, well, does your thyroid or your adrenal gland play a role in any way with regards to your fatigue and your anxiety and your worry and your doubt and the fact that you have this chronic challenge within yourself? Who knows? But if you have a high index of suspicion, then you're happy to facilitate that process. Now, in the sessions prior, so far we've covered about 17 sessions, there's been a best fit line, what we call a regression line, something that runs through all of the various sessions. And that has to do with energy. Fundamentally, diet and how you are what you eat. And therefore, whatever you eat is working this miraculous feat in your body. If you eat well, and if you have the right diet, and if you're consuming the right micronutrients, and if your mitochondria is in a state that is not slow, in other words, if you are at an optimal state, and you find that you still have this struggle with depression, anxiety, fatigue, worry, uncertainty, then there is a strong case for you to believe, based on your index of suspicion, that your thyroid or your adrenal hyperfunctions might not be in its ideal state. Now, the question then becomes, okay, how do you go about fixing it? Well, let me start as follows. I'm no medical professional, but I will say one of the things you should do is measure it. You cannot manage what you do not measure. You cannot manage what you do not measure. So the first step is measurement. We do that measurement process in several ways, clinically, but also by observation. Now, from the clinical perspective, I alluded to this partly in the session prior, is that if you measure the levels of your thyroid stimulating hormones, what we call your TSH, and if you measure your free thyroxine, what we call your T4, or you measure your free T3, then you have a base, something in pictures, something in words, that allows you to see where you fall within the reference range. For example, let me use this example because I think it'll be important. Imagine if you drove a car where there was no fuel tank, so you never knew whether you had enough fuel or you were about to run into empty, but you were taking this long journey. No fuel tank. And let's just assume as part of this process that there was no historical information available as to when the car was previously fueled. What you then have is this, you're running and taking this journey and applying chance and luck and hope as a strategy. On the other hand, if someone were to ask you to come into a petrol station and that they could top up the vehicle, and in topping up the vehicle at some point, by virtue of the nozzle of the fuel delivery system, you would know how much fuel you had put in the car, which would then give you an indication as to how much of a distance you can travel before you actually need more. That would be of massive help. In a similar fashion, when I refer to taking the time to do tests to identify the levels of your TSH or your T4, your free T4 or your free T3 in the blood, particularly I should have said this, what this indicates is that you're trying to ensure that each is at an optimum level. But more importantly, you're also trying to ensure that the reverse, the converse, is not the case. In other words, if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, fatigue, get a DIY blood test or get a standard blood test. Now, when I say DIY blood test, I made reference to in the sessions prior. I showed you an example of my own test pack. This is a DIY test pack. I don't have to rely on the NHS for my tests, despite me being willing to have them done. But it's my life, my responsibility. I'm the manager. I have to measure. Therefore, in order for me to manage, I have to measure. So I go out and I get packs like this. It's delivered directly to my house. And it says to be opened by a medical professional. I sit down with someone who is trained and I get them to take my bloods. I complete the pack and I send it to the blood testing company. And after a few weeks, I receive a breakdown by email of the results of my blood test. With that information, I have something that I can measure. You need a clinical picture. And this begins by steps that you can take as an individual, and then complementing those steps with what I just described, which is a standard blood test. And this, when you have both sides, you have enough information then to assess as to whether your body is functioning or one of the organs in the body is functioning at an optimal or below optimal state. Let's start with a clinical picture, which begins with you. Yeah, you might send off the bloods, but before that, think about this. The clinical picture of understanding how your body functions begins with just observation. Now, most people will tell you, I know something is not right with me. I feel depressed. That's observation. So we already have the power and the ability to observe. I'm saying extend this beyond just how you feel on the inside, in your head, in your mind, in your heart, and extend this to the physical. The clinical picture and the diagnosis process starts with you simply measuring your core temperature. Anybody can do this. There are devices you can get that can help you monitor your temperature on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, or throughout the whole day. And so what you then have is a data set of your core temperature over days, weeks, or even months. You can also measure your pulse rate. And finally, you can measure your blood pressure. Now, with the three measurements, you can then connect this. These are objective measurements, so you have results. You connect those with subjective measurements. The subjective measurement is your feeling. We define feeling as our conscious awareness of the state of resonance or vibration that we are in. We are all energy, and therefore we resonate at a level we call a frequency. When we don't feel too well, we feel low in this frequency. We call this feelings. When we feel great, we call them higher frequencies. So by checking how you feel and combining this with the objective measurements, you have a clinical picture. You take this group and then you combine it with the test that you have done. And you have an idea about where you are with regards to what we call the reference range. I make reference to the fact that you have this clinical range with regards to tests. Every test result will come back with a range, but that range is slightly misleading. There's the population range. That is based on how the population has evolved. If the population has become less healthy, then you have a lower range. And so it's never really useful to compare yourself to the population range. You have to compare yourself to your actual health range. So the population range, for example, could be whatever what you're measuring is, could be between 8 and 12. But yours might be between 9 and 17, primarily because you were different. And therefore, for most people, this is why most people struggle with depression, because most people are told, if you feel X and you feel Y and Z, oh, that's how everybody feels. That means there's nothing wrong with you. That's not correct. Everybody might feel X, Y, Z, and you feel A, and there could be something wrong. But you go through that exercise to understand where you are. Now, one of the things is that if you've done the initial subjective feelings assessment, and you've done the objective measurements, core temperature, blood pressure, pulse rate, and you've done the test itself, it then gives you, based on the results of the test, whether there is biochemical or clinical scope for any form of treatment with regards to thyroid or adrenal support. Now for this, go see an expert. But the point of today's session is to simply say, you see, thyroid and adrenal problems present themselves in most fatigue or depression related difficulties most people face. Do not ignore it. It's very easy to say, well, this has nothing to do with my thyroid. I'm healthy. You never know. I made reference to the fact in the prior session that most people in the West that we have one of the highest levels of underdiagnosis of hypothyroidism. Most people have an underactive thyroid. Dr. Kenneth Blanchard talks about this, and he says, well, in the West, from his assessment, at a minimum, 40%, now that number is much higher depending on what sex you choose, 40% of people have an underactive thyroid. Now understand this doesn't mean you don't suddenly have a problem. It just means that with regards to energy delivery, your body's not delivering energy in the right way, because like a car, if the gearbox is not working as it should, and the accelerator pedal is not working as it should, we struggle. It means we can't handle crisis when they come. It means we can't actually gear up, for the working week. Sometimes for some people, we can't actually slow down at the end of the working week. We're just so hyper. And therefore our body's releasing cortisol and adrenaline, and it's all over the place, and we feel awful. And we unfortunately suppress this with symptom suppressing medication. We indulge ourselves in many ways, either by using drinks, food, lifestyle activities, but we do things that do not address the root cause of the issue. And that root cause could just simply be a case where the body, the glands in the body are not functioning in their proper way. That could be as a result of diet. That could also be as a result of lacking the right supplements. It could just be your mitochondria doesn't function as it should. But particularly, it could actually be that there is a scope for both clinical trial and biochemical trial of thyroid or adrenal supplementation. I can't talk about that. I don't know much about that with regards to what you should take. I would simply say, see an expert. Your endocrinologist could be a right place to start. Or you go see someone who might be an ecological doctor, what do they call them? A naturopath, who can take you through the holistic approach and how diet plays a role with regards to your health. I hope today's session has been useful.